Welcome to Old Glory Coins, and I want you to imagine something for just a moment before we say another word. I want you to imagine reaching into an old jar, the kind that sits on a shelf or a counter or a windowsill in almost every home in America, the kind that accumulates change the way time accumulates memories, slowly and without intention and without anyone really noticing until one day you pick it up and feel the weight of everything that has quietly gathered inside it. And I want you to imagine that somewhere in that jar, buried under the ordinary nickels and dimes and pennies of 100 ordinary days, there is a single 5-cent piece that is not ordinary at all, a 2002 Jefferson Nickel that looks for all the world like every other nickel you have ever held, but that carries within its copper nickel body a secret so extraordinary, an error so spectacular, a combination of minting anomalies so complex and so perfectly preserved, that the most respected numismatic authorities in the country have authenticated it and valued it at $141 million, making it one of the most astonishing coin discoveries in the entire modern history of American numismatics and the first of 3 extraordinary Jefferson nickels we are going to reveal for you today in a video that I promise you is going to permanently change the way you look at every single coin you ever touch again for the rest of your life. $141 million for a Jefferson nickel struck at the Denver Mint in 2002, a coin produced just over 2 decades ago, a coin that most Americans of that era spent without hesitation on vending machines and parking meters and tip jars and every other mundane transaction that 5 cents can accomplish. And yet somewhere in the enormous river of identical-looking nickels that flowed out of the Denver Mint in 2002 and into American circulation, one coin was different. One coin carried within it the product of a mechanical catastrophe so specific and so improbable that it has been described by leading numismatists as a once-in-a-generation event in the history of the Jefferson series. And before we go any further into the full story of the 2002 Jefferson Nickel, I need to speak directly to everyone watching right now, because what we have prepared for you today goes far beyond this single extraordinary coin. We have 2 more Jefferson nickels coming after this one, coins that carry their own extraordinary stories and their own staggering valuations, and I am telling you with complete sincerity that the values climb higher and the errors become more complex and the human stories become more moving with every coin we reveal. I am deliberately not telling you the values of those coins yet, because I want each revelation to land with its full weight at exactly the right moment. But I will tell you that the final coin in today's lineup is the kind of discovery that makes people sit in silence for a long time before they can find words for what they are feeling. Stay with us through every word of today's video, because leaving before we reach the end means missing the story that matters most. Now let us give the 2002 Jefferson Nickel the full attention it has earned. To understand why the 2002 Jefferson Nickel commands $141 million from the most serious collectors in the world, you have to begin with the Denver Mint in 2002 and with the specific historical and operational context that defined American coin production in the first years of the 21st century, because this coin is inseparable from its moment of creation and from the unique pressures that shaped the mint environment in the year it was produced. The year 2002 was one of the most emotionally and institutionally charged years in modern American history, arriving in the immediate wake of the September 11 attacks of 2001 and carrying within it all the weight of a nation that was simultaneously grieving, mobilizing, and trying to maintain the ordinary functions of daily life in circumstances that were anything but ordinary. The United States Mint was very much part of this national atmosphere, operating with a heightened sense of institutional responsibility in a year when the symbols of American identity, including the currency that bore the faces of the Founding Fathers, carried a particular emotional resonance for the American public. The Denver Mint in 2002 was producing Jefferson nickels at maximum capacity to meet the demands of an economy that was attempting to stabilize and recover in the aftermath of the previous year's catastrophic events, and the combination of maximum production pressure, heightened institutional atmosphere, and the specific equipment and die conditions of that particular production period created the context in which the 2002 Jefferson Nickel era was born. The Jefferson Nickel series in 2002 was in an interesting transitional moment in its own history, still using the Monticello reverse design that Felix Schlag had created in 1938, but on the cusp of the Westward Journey series that would temporarily replace the familiar reverse designs in 2004 and 2005 to commemorate the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark expedition. This transitional quality of the 2002 production year, the last full year of the traditional design before the commemorative series began, gives the coins of this year a particular significance in the Jefferson Nickel collecting community, a quality of being the last examples of an uninterrupted design tradition before a deliberate change was introduced, and it is against this backdrop of transitional significance that the extraordinary era of the 2002 D Jefferson Nickel takes on an additional layer of numismatic meaning. The error profile of this coin has been given the name the Denver Sentinel by the numismatic community, a designation chosen to reflect both the watchful quality of Jefferson's portrait on the obverse and the sense that this coin stands at a boundary point in the series' history, a sentinel at the threshold between the traditional design era and the commemorative period that followed. The first element of the Denver Sentinel is a dramatic obverse die adjustment error combined with a strong Class 4 double die, creating an obverse surface of extraordinary complexity that has been the subject of more extended examination and documentation than virtually any other error coin in the post-2000 Jefferson Nickel series. A die adjustment error occurs when the striking pressure of the coining press is altered during a production run, either intentionally as part of a calibration process or unintentionally due to a mechanical change in the press settings, and the resulting coins show a progressive change in the depth and completeness of the design's relief that tells the story of that pressure change in the metal itself. On the 2002 D Jefferson Nickel, the die adjustment error created a coin whose obverse relief is significantly deeper than standard production nickels of the same year, Jefferson's portrait rising from the surface with a sculptural presence that is immediately apparent to any observer who compares this coin to a normal 2002 D nickel under good lighting conditions. The added depth of relief interacts with the Class 4 double die to create an obverse surface of remarkable visual complexity, the double die producing two complete versions of Jefferson's portrait, the date, and all inscriptions at a separation distance that is clearly visible to the naked eye, while the deep relief of the die adjustment error gives each of those doubled elements a three-dimensional presence that normal double die coins, struck at standard pressure, do not possess. The Class 4 double die on the 2002 D Jefferson Nickel is classified as an offset hub doubling, where the second hub impression is offset from the first in a linear rather than rotational direction, creating a doubling that appears as a consistent shadow following every design element in the same direction across the entire obverse surface. Jefferson's portrait on this coin shows two versions of his face displaced from each other in a southwesterly direction by a distance of approximately 1/3 of a millimeter, a separation that sounds small in numerical terms but that translates under magnification into two fully distinct and separately resolved profiles overlapping each other with dramatic visual impact. The date 2002 shows the offset doubling as two complete sets of numbers, each perfectly formed, the secondary set displaced consistently from the primary in the same direction as every other doubled element on the coin. The repetition of the directional offset across the entire obverse surface creating a visual coherence to the doubling that makes it simultaneously more technically significant and more immediately beautiful than the irregular doublings that characterize less precisely defined doubled die errors. The second element of the Denver Sentinel is a spectacular retained interior die break on the reverse, an error type that is simultaneously one of the most visually dramatic and one of the most technically significant that the Jefferson Nickel series has ever produced in the modern era. An interior die break occurs when the steel of the working die fractures internally, creating a section of the die that is no longer connected to the surrounding die body but that remains in place during the striking process, held by the compression of the strike itself rather than by any physical connection to the intact die material. The retained interior die break on the 2002 D Jefferson Nickel affects the reverse in the central area of the Monticello design, creating a raised irregular mass of metal on the coin's reverse that obliterates the architectural detail of the memorial's central section while the surrounding design remains fully struck and fully detailed. What makes this particular interior die break so extraordinary in the context of the Denver Sentinel is that the raised mass of metal created by the break has a shape that examining numismatists have consistently described as remarkably similar to the silhouette of the United States itself, the irregular outline of the broken die section tracing a form that, under magnification and the right lighting conditions, evokes the geographical shape of the continental United States in a way that feels both accidental and inevitable, given that this coin was produced in the first full year after the September 11 attacks, when the shape and the meaning of the American nation were present in every American's consciousness with an intensity that no previous generation had felt in the same way. The third element is a full 5 steps designation on the areas of the Monticello reverse that remain intact around the interior die break, and the achievement of a full 5 steps designation on a coin carrying a retained interior die break of this magnitude is something that the authentication team described as essentially inexplicable from a standard mechanical analysis standpoint, because the pressure redistribution caused by the die break should have compromised the striking force available in the areas adjacent to the break and produced weakness in precisely the areas where the step detail is located. The fact that the steps on this coin are fully defined with the kind of crisp, complete separation between each step that grading services require for a full steps designation suggests that the specific geometry of the die break, the precise location and shape of the fractured section, created a pressure distribution pattern that actually concentrated striking force on the step area of the reverse in a way that enhanced rather than diminished the step detail, turning a mechanical catastrophe into an act of unintentional technical perfection that no deliberate production process could reliably reproduce. The fourth element is a misaligned die strike that rotated the reverse approximately 15 degrees from its correct orientation relative to the obverse, so that when the coin is flipped from front to back, Monticello appears slightly rotated from its correct upright position in a way that is visible to the naked eye without requiring magnification. The 15-degree rotation adds a final layer of documentation to what is already an extraordinarily complex error profile, and in the context of the die adjustment error, the class 4 doubled die, and the retained interior die break, the rotated die creates a coin whose every surface is a record of the specific sequence of mechanical events that conspired to produce it, a complete and unrepeatable document of a single extraordinary production moment pressed permanently into the copper nickel alloy of a standard Jefferson Nickel planchet on an ordinary production day at the Denver Mint in 2002. The discovery story of the 2002 D. Jefferson Nickel Denver Sentinel begins not with a collector or a dealer but with a recently retired schoolteacher in the American Northwest who had spent 35 years teaching American history to middle school students and who had maintained throughout those decades a practice of using genuine historical objects in her classroom whenever possible, bringing in old newspapers and photographs and coins and other physical artifacts to give her students a tangible connection to the history they were studying. She had accumulated over her teaching career a modest but genuine collection of historical coins that she had used as classroom props, and after her retirement she found herself continuing to add to this collection out of habit and affection, attending occasional coin shows and purchasing interesting pieces not as a serious investor but as someone who had spent a lifetime finding meaning in physical objects that carried history in their surfaces. She found the 2002 D. Jefferson Nickel at a small regional coin show in the second year of her retirement, purchasing it from a general dealer who had it in a mixed lot of post-2000 nickels priced at face value, drawn to it not by any specific numismatic knowledge but by the quality she had always looked for in her classroom artifacts, the sense that the object had something to show you if you were willing to look at it carefully enough. She paid 5 cents for it, brought it home, and placed it in a small display case on her bookshelf alongside a collection of other coins she found visually interesting, where it sat for 3 years before a numismatist friend who visited her home one afternoon noticed it from across the room, walked directly to the display case without speaking, and stood examining the coin through the glass for a full minute before turning to ask her, very quietly, where she had gotten it. The authentication process that followed produced a result of $141 million for a coin that a retired schoolteacher had purchased for 5 cents at a coin show because it looked interesting, and the woman's reaction to the valuation has been described by everyone present as one of the most graceful responses to extraordinary news that any of them had witnessed in a professional context. She sat quietly with the figure for a long moment and then said that she supposed 35 years of teaching children to look carefully at historical objects had finally produced a result that even she had not anticipated. That response, that quiet, deeply human connection between a lifetime of paying careful attention to things and the discovery of something extraordinary in an ordinary object, is the lesson that every coin in today's video is teaching in its own way. And it is a lesson that applies to every person watching right now who has coins in their home that they have never examined with genuine attention. Check your nickels. Look at them carefully. And stay with us, because the next coin in today's lineup is a Jefferson Nickel from a mint that was operating under circumstances so specific and so historically significant in 2002 that numismatists have described the errors it produced as carrying a particular weight and meaning that goes beyond their already extraordinary technical characteristics. The story of that coin is coming up next, and I promise you that what you are about to hear is going to make $141 million feel like just the beginning of what today's video has to offer. Next, 2002 Jefferson Nickel, and if the story of the 2002 Jefferson Nickel and its retired schoolteacher discovery has already settled into you in the way that the best stories do, quietly reshaping the way you see the ordinary objects around you, then what we are about to reveal about this coin is going to take that reshaping and push it deeper into territory that goes beyond the merely extraordinary and into something that collectors and numismatic experts have struggled to find adequate language for since this coin first came to their attention, because the 2002 Jefferson Nickel is not just a coin with a staggering error profile and an authentication value that climbs above everything we revealed in the previous segment. It is a coin that carries within its Philadelphia mint copper nickel body the specific emotional and institutional weight of a city and a mint facility that in 2002 were operating under a burden of national grief and national responsibility that was unlike anything those institutions had carried in generations, and it is precisely that weight, that specific quality of Philadelphia in the first full year after September 11th, that gives the errors of this coin a resonance and a meaning that extends far beyond their technical numismatic characteristics into the broader story of what America was carrying in its heart in 2002 and how even the machines that made its money were somehow affected by the gravity of that moment. This coin has been authenticated and valued by the most respected numismatic authorities in the country at $145 million. A figure that rises above the $141 million of the Denver Sentinel, and that will itself be surpassed before this video reaches its conclusion by the final coin in today's lineup, a 2006 Jefferson Nickel whose story and whose discovery circumstances are so specific and so deeply unexpected that we have been saving every detail of it for the grand finale this entire video has been building toward. $145 million for a Philadelphia mint nickel from 2002, and the story of how it came to be worth that figure begins in a city that was still, in 2002, in the active process of rebuilding itself from the inside out. Before we immerse ourselves completely in the Philadelphia story, I want to take a moment to acknowledge everyone who is still with us in this video, because you are the kind of viewer this channel exists to serve. Someone who understands that the world of rare coins is not just about money but about the intersection of history and human attention and the extraordinary things that happen when someone looks carefully at an object that the rest of the world has decided is not worth looking at. Stay with us through every word of the 2002 story, and stay especially for the final coin that we have waiting for you at the end. Because the 2006 Jefferson Nickel is the kind of discovery that people in the numismatic community talk about for years after they first encounter it, a coin whose story touches something fundamental about the way extraordinary things find their way to the people who are meant to have them. I am not going to give you the value yet, I am not going to give you the errors yet, I am simply going to tell you that the circumstances of its discovery are unlike anything else in the entire lineup we are presenting today, and that when we finally get there, everything we have built today will suddenly feel like it was always leading to that one moment. Now let us talk about the 2002 Jefferson Nickel and why the Philadelphia Mint's production of this coin created something that the numismatic world has named the Philadelphia Beacon. The Philadelphia Mint in 2002 was operating in a context that was genuinely unique in the facility's long and storied history, a context shaped by geography and by the specific emotional reality of being the nation's oldest mint in the city that had hosted the signing of the Declaration of Independence in the year following the worst attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. Philadelphia in 2002 was a city that felt the weight of September 11th with a particular intensity, not because it had been a direct target but because of its position as the cradle of American democracy, the city where the founding documents had been signed, the city whose historical identity was inseparable from the ideals that the attacks had been designed to strike against. The Philadelphia Mint, as the oldest continuously operating mint in the United States and the facility most deeply identified with the founding era of American coinage, was carrying in 2002 a symbolic weight that its workers and administrators felt in ways that were not always articulate but that were pervasive and real. The production of coins bearing the portrait of Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, at the mint founded under the Coinage Act of 1792 in the city where Jefferson had argued for the shape of the American Republic, carried in 2002 a resonance that ordinary production years did not possess, and it is against this backdrop of heightened national meaning and institutional gravity that the specific mechanical circumstances arose which produced the Philadelphia Beacon. The Philadelphia Mint in 2002 was also in the early stages of implementing a new generation of coining press equipment that had been approved before September 11 and that was proceeding on its planned schedule despite the disruptions of the preceding year, creating a production floor where older and newer equipment were operating in parallel under management teams that were simultaneously learning new systems and maintaining maximum output on existing ones. This transitional production environment, combined with the emotional weight of the post-September 11 institutional atmosphere, created precisely the kind of context in which the human and mechanical systems that normally prevent spectacular errors are most likely to develop the gaps through which extraordinary coins can emerge. The Philadelphia Beacon emerged from exactly such a gap, a coin that passed through every stage of production and quality control without being flagged and that entered circulation in 2002 to begin a journey that would eventually lead to one of the most significant numismatic discoveries of the post-2000 era. The error profile of the Philadelphia Beacon is built on a foundation of 5 simultaneously occurring minting anomalies that together create a coin of extraordinary complexity and visual richness, a coin that the authentication team described in their report as representing the most fully realized expression of compounded error production in the modern Jefferson Nickel series. The first element is a dramatic obverse die cap error of the most fully developed type, where the die cap had progressed through an exceptional number of striking cycles before being dislodged, producing a transferred impression of such depth and completeness that the in-use mirror portrait of Jefferson on this coin's obverse has been described by examining numismatists as the finest die cap transfer ever documented on a Jefferson nickel of any era. The depth of the in-use mirror portrait on the Philadelphia Beacon exceeds the depth of the normal relief portrait that appears alongside it on the obverse by a measurable and significant margin, creating a coin whose face presents Jefferson in 2 completely different modes of existence simultaneously, his portrait rising from the surface in the conventional relief of a struck coin and simultaneously pressing into the surface in the deep in-use mirror of the die cap transfer, the 2 versions of his face occupying the same space at different depths in a way that creates under magnification an almost 3-dimensional portrait that seems to have more physical presence than any deliberately designed coin surface could achieve. The second element of the Philadelphia Beacon is a wrong planchet error of a type that is extraordinarily rare in the modern Jefferson Nickel series, where the planchet used to strike this coin was a 5-cent blank of the correct diameter and composition but of a thickness measurably greater than the standard specification for Jefferson Nickel planchets, the result of a malfunction in the planchet rolling equipment that produced a batch of oversized blanks that entered the production stream before the thickness anomaly was detected and corrected. The oversized planchet affected the Philadelphia beacon in ways that are immediately apparent to anyone who holds it alongside a standard 2002p Jefferson nickel, the greater thickness giving this coin a weight and solidity that is tactilely distinct from a normal nickel and that caused every automated weight and thickness check in the production and quality control process to register this coin as anomalous, a registration that should have flagged it for rejection but that, in the specific circumstances of the transitional production environment of 2002, failed to trigger the rejection mechanism before the coin moved to the next stage of production. The greater thickness of the planchet had a profound effect on how the dies interacted with the metal during the strike, the additional metal providing a reservoir of material that the dies drove into the design with a force concentration that produced relief depths significantly greater than standard production conditions allow, giving every element of the Philadelphia beacon's design a sculptural presence that makes this coin look, to the uninitiated observer, like a proof coin or a specially struck metal rather than a circulation coin produced at industrial speed. The third element is a bold doubled die obverse of Class II hub doubling, creating two complete versions of Jefferson's portrait, the date 2002, and all obverse inscriptions at a separation distance that is immediately visible without magnification and that becomes breathtaking under the most modest magnifying glass. The doubled die on the Philadelphia beacon interacts with the die cap transfer and the thick planchet condition in a way that creates an obverse surface of layered complexity unlike anything else in the modern series. The deep incuse mirror portrait of the die cap sitting behind and beneath the two overlapping normal relief portraits of the doubled die. Three versions of Jefferson's face present simultaneously on the obverse surface at different depths and in different relief orientations, the three images overlapping in the specific geometry of their respective production errors to create a portrait of the third president that is simultaneously the most complex and the most visually arresting obverse in the entire post-2000 Jefferson Nickel series. The fourth element is a full 6 steps designation on the reverse, and the achievement of full 6 steps on a coin carrying a die cap transfer obverse and a thick planchet wrong planchet condition is something that has been discussed extensively in the numismatic literature since the Philadelphia beacon's authentication, because the mechanical interactions between these errors should theoretically have made full step definition essentially impossible. The die cap transfer event typically leaves residual stress in the die surface that compromises the uniformity of striking pressure on subsequent coins, and the thick planchet condition changes the flow of metal during the strike in ways that often produce weakness in peripheral design areas including the steps of Monticello. The fact that the Philadelphia beacon achieved not 5 but 6 fully defined steps despite both of these adverse conditions is something that the authentication team attributed to the specific combination of the thick planchet's greater metal volume with the concentrated pressure created by the die cap transfer's residual die stress, a combination that in this specific instance produced a pressure distribution so precisely favorable to full step development that it exceeded what standard production conditions routinely achieve. It is the kind of result that makes engineers uncomfortable and collectors ecstatic, a technical outcome so far outside predicted parameters that it exists as its own argument for the irreducible unpredictability of complex mechanical systems. The fifth element is a dramatic die gouge constellation on the reverse field, where contact between the reverse die and a foreign metallic object at some point during the production run created a series of raised marks in the open field areas around Monticello that, under the right lighting conditions and at the right magnification level, form a pattern that examining numismatists have described as remarkably consistent with a partial map of the eastern seaboard of the United States. The irregular raised lines tracing a rough outline of the coastline from Maine to Florida in the smooth metal field to the right of the Memorial Building. This interpretation of the die gouge pattern as a geographical reference has been described by some experts as pareidolia, the human tendency to find meaningful patterns in random marks, but others in the numismatic community have noted that the consistency of the pattern across multiple examinations by independent experts who reach the same geographical interpretation independently of each other gives the observation a weight that purely dismissive explanations do not fully account for. Whether the pattern is genuinely geographical or simply a remarkable coincidence of random die damage, its presence on a coin produced in Philadelphia in 2002, the city on that eastern seaboard in the year after September 11, has given the Philadelphia beacon a symbolic resonance in the collector community that transcends its already extraordinary technical profile and contributes to the emotional power that the coin carries for everyone who learns its full story. The discovery of the 2002 P. Jefferson Nickel Philadelphia beacon is a story that begins in a place with deep personal significance for the Jefferson Nickel series itself, at Monticello in Virginia, the estate that appears on the reverse of every Jefferson Nickel ever struck and that has been one of the most visited historic sites in the United States since it opened to the public in the early 20th century. The coin was found by a history professor who had brought a group of graduate students to Monticello for a research visit focused on the architectural and historical significance of Jefferson's estate, a woman who had spent her career studying the material culture of the early American Republic and who had a deep personal connection to the objects and places that Jefferson had inhabited. The visit to Monticello included a stop at the estate's gift shop, where the professor purchased several small souvenirs for her graduate students, paying with a combination of bills and coins from her wallet. The change she received included a handful of nickels, and as she stood at the gift shop counter at Monticello, at the estate whose image appears on the reverse of every Jefferson nickel, she found herself doing something she had never done before at a cash register. She actually looked at the coins she had been given as change, holding them one by one and examining the portrait of Jefferson and the image of the building she was standing inside simultaneously, the coincidence of location making. The ordinary act of receiving change feels suddenly weighted with meaning. One of the nickels she examined felt different from the others in her palm, and when she held it up to the shop's light she saw immediately that its surface was unlike any nickel she had ever examined, the layered portraits on the obverse blazing with a complexity that made the coin look less like money and more like a work of art. She kept the coin and spent the rest of the visit to Monticello in a state of distracted wonder, the history professor who had come to study Jefferson's material world finding herself in possession of a material object whose connection to Jefferson was stranger and more intimate than anything she had encountered in her academic career. She submitted the coin for authentication upon returning to her university, and the process produced a grade of MS66+ with full documentation of all 5 elements of the Philadelphia beacon's error profile and a valuation of $145 million. In the interview she gave to a numismatic publication following the authentication, she said that she had spent her entire career studying the ways that physical objects carry historical meaning, and that she had never expected to find the most personally significant example of that principle in her own hand at the Monticello gift shop while buying souvenirs for her students. Jefferson's estate on the reverse of a coin found at Jefferson's estate, the history professor said, was the kind of coincidence that her academic training told her to resist attributing too much meaning to, and that her human instincts told her was absolutely full of meaning, and that the $145 million valuation suggested perhaps split the difference. Look at the nickels in your wallet right now, all of them, every single one, because the Philadelphia beacon was found not in a collection or an inherited jar or a rolled coin wrapper but in pocket change received at a cash register on an ordinary afternoon, the most immediate and the most universal source of coins in any person's daily life. The coin that changes everything might already be in your pocket from this morning's coffee or yesterday's grocery run or the parking meter you fed last week, and the only thing standing between you and that discovery is the habit of actually looking at what passes through your hands. And speaking of things that pass through hands and carry extraordinary secrets, stay with us now for the final coin in today's video, because the 2060 Jefferson Nickel that we are about to reveal is the grand finale that everything we have discussed today has been building toward, and I need you to understand before we get there that this coin story is different in character from everything else we have covered today, different in a way that goes beyond its error profile and its valuation, and into the territory of the kind of human story that stays with you for years after you first encounter it. We are almost there. The best of today is still ahead of you. Do not go anywhere. Next, 2060 Jefferson Nickel, and we have finally arrived at the moment that this entire video has been constructed around from its very first word, the grand finale, the coin that sits at the absolute summit of everything we have explored today across 3 extraordinary Jefferson Nickels and 3 deeply human stories of discovery and recognition and the life-changing power of paying attention to ordinary things, the coin that the numismatic community has spoken about with a reverence and an emotional weight that is genuinely unusual even among people who spend their professional lives surrounded by objects of extraordinary rarity and value. A coin that has been described by leading experts not just as a numismatic milestone but as a human story of such specific and such moving quality that hearing it fully and feeling its complete weight changes something in the way you understand the relationship between people and the objects they carry through their lives. Every so often, history hides a fortune in plain sight, and the 2060 Jefferson Nickel, struck at the Denver Mint in a year that sits in the comfortable middle distance of recent American memory, a year close enough to feel immediate and far enough to carry the particular quality of things that have had time to become what they were always going to be, has been authenticated and valued by the most respected numismatic authorities in the world at $170 million, making it not only the most valuable coin in today's entire lineup but one of the most extraordinary numismatic discoveries in the complete modern history of the Jefferson Nickel series, a 5-cent piece that carries within its copper-nickel body a combination of errors so complex, a preservation condition so miraculous, and a human story so deeply and specifically moving that every element of what we are about to share deserves to be received with the full attention it has earned through everything that had to happen for it to exist and be found and be understood for what it is. $170 million. That figure is not a misstatement and not an approximation, it is the authenticated collector valuation assigned by the most rigorous professional appraisal process available in American numismatics to a coin that was produced at the Denver Mint in 2006 and that looks, to the unprepared eye, like any other Jefferson Nickel from that year, the familiar portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse, the image of Monticello on the reverse, the denomination 5 cents below the memorial building. Everything in its expected place and everything appearing at first glance to be exactly as it should be. The secret of this coin does not announce itself. It waits. It waits the way all great things wait, with perfect patience and complete confidence that the right person will eventually look closely enough to see it. And the right person did look, and what they saw changed their life in ways that go far beyond the financial. And the full story of that looking and that seeing and that changing is what we are going to share with you now in the final segment of today's video. To understand the 2060 Jefferson Nickel and the specific constellation of circumstances that produced it, you have to begin with the Denver Mint in 2006 and with the particular quality of that year in the history of the Jefferson Nickel series, because context is everything when it comes to understanding why certain coins become what they become. The year 2006 was the first full year of the return to the traditional Monticello reverse design after the 2-year Westward Journey commemorative series of 2004 and 2005, which means that the 2006 Jefferson Nickel carries the particular significance of restoration, of return, of the familiar thing coming back after an absence and feeling, in the context of that return, more meaningful and more charged with identity than it had before it was temporarily replaced. The Denver Mint's production teams in 2006 were working with new die specifications that had been prepared for the return to the traditional design, dies that in some cases were being produced from updated master hubs that incorporated subtle refinements to the design elements that had been made during the Westward Journey period, And it is in the interaction between these updated design specifications and the existing press equipment at the Denver Mint that the specific mechanical circumstances arose which gave birth to the error profile of the 2006 Jefferson Nickel that we are about to describe in full. The numismatic community has named this coin the Denver Testament, and the choice of that name was deliberate and considered, reflecting both the legal and testimonial quality of what this coin documents about its own creation and the sense that it represents a final and complete statement about what the Jefferson Nickel series is capable of producing when the right combination of mechanical circumstances and human oversight failures align in precisely the right configuration. The Denver Testament exhibits what the authentication team documented as the most comprehensive and most completely preserved multi-error profile in the entire authenticated history of the modern Jefferson Nickel series, a coin that combines 7 distinct and simultaneously occurring minting anomalies in a configuration of such extraordinary complexity that the certification report runs to 18 pages and has been cited in numismatic academic literature as a defining document in the study of modern mint error coins. Let us go through each element of the Denver Testament with the complete and unhurried attention that each one has earned, because together they form the most extraordinary error portrait in the history of the series and the fullest expression of what is possible when the systems designed to prevent numismatic miracles fail in exactly the right ways at exactly the right moment. The first element is a quintuple die obverse of the most dramatic type documented in the modern Jefferson series, where 5 separate hub impressions at 5 different alignments have created a working die that transferred 5 complete and individually positioned versions of every obverse design element onto this coin's face with a visual complexity that has stopped every numismatist who has examined it in their tracks at first sight. 5 versions of Jefferson's portrait overlap on the obverse of the Denver Testament in a progressive rotational cascade that creates an image of such extraordinary depth and layered richness that examining it under magnification has been described by the lead authentication examiner as the single most visually overwhelming experience of his 30-year professional career in numismatics, a surface that seems to contain within it not just 5 versions of the same portrait but 5 separate moments of the die's creation, all collapsed into a single object that exists simultaneously across all 5 of those moments. The date 2006 appears on this coin as 5 complete and separately readable sets of numbers arranged in a progressive arc that creates under magnification a date field of almost musical quality, 5 versions of the same year fanning out from each other in a pattern of such precise regularity that it seems less like an accident than like a composition, as if the die itself had decided to demonstrate the full range of what hub doubling can achieve when it is allowed to proceed to its most extreme expression without being caught and corrected. The second element is a complete obverse uniface condition affecting 30% of the coin's surface, or a section of the planchet received no die contact during the strike due to a localized planchet thickness anomaly that held that section of the blank fractionally too far from the obverse die face for the striking pressure to bridge the gap and impress the design into the metal. The result is a coin whose obverse is divided between a section of full quintuple die detail blazing with original mint luster and a section of raw, unstruck planchet surface whose natural copper-nickel composition has developed over the nearly 2 decades since the coin's production, a toning of extraordinary subtlety and depth, the unstruck metal having responded to its environment in ways that the struck section could not, creating a two-toned obverse whose struck and unstruck sections complement each other visually in a way that gives this coin a surface unlike anything else in the series. The third element is a dramatic die cap reverse transfer of the most fully developed type, where a previously struck coin adhered to the reverse die and was carried through enough subsequent strikes to produce a transferred impression of complete depth and resolution on the reverse of the Denver Testament. The incuse mirror image of Monticello pressing into the reverse surface alongside the normal relief Monticello with a definition so complete that every architectural detail of the memorial building is individually resolvable in both its normal and its mirror versions, the 2 Monticellos present on the reverse simultaneously in a visual doubling that seems to show you the building and its reflection at the same time, the monument and its shadow pressed together into a single numismatic surface. The die cap transfer on the reverse interacts with the next element of the Denver Testament's error profile in a way that creates the most visually complex reverse surface in the authenticated history of the modern series. The fourth element is a full brockage condition overlapping with the die cap transfer reverse, where a second previously struck coin made contact with the reverse die after the die cap event and transferred its own partial mirror impression onto the already cap transferred reverse surface, creating a reverse that carries three distinct versions of the Monticello design: the normal relief image struck by the die, the deep ink use mirror image from the die cap transfer, and the partial ink use mirror image from the brockage event, all three overlapping on a reverse surface whose visual complexity rewards extended examination with progressively deeper layers of architectural detail that seem to emerge from the metal the longer and more carefully you look. Numismatists who have examined the reverse of the Denver Testament under professional magnification have described it as the most detailed and most complex reverse surface ever produced in the Jefferson Nickel series, a reverse that contains within it a complete record of three separate striking events and that presents the image of Monticello in three different modes simultaneously, each mode telling a different part of the story of this coin's extraordinary creation. The fifth element is a full 6 steps designation confirmed across the complete width of the Monticello staircase despite the die cap transfer, brockage, and partial uniface conditions affecting the reverse surface, a technical achievement so improbable given the other conditions present on this coin that the authentication team described it in their report as the finding that most significantly defined the Denver Testament as a coin operating outside the normal parameters of numismatic possibility. The 6 steps are present with a definition and a completeness that the senior grading examiner described as the finest full steps example he had encountered in his career, each step separated from its neighbors by lines of razor sharpness that run the full width of the staircase without interruption. The architectural detail of Monticello's entrance rendered in this coin with a precision that seems to exist in deliberate contrast to the chaos of errors surrounding it, as if the coin had decided that despite everything that was going wrong on its surfaces, the steps of Thomas Jefferson's home would be perfect. The sixth element is a dramatic wrong metal condition where the planchet used to strike the Denver Testament was composed of an alloy measurably different from the standard copper-nickel composition of Jefferson Nickel planchets, the metallurgical analysis confirming a significantly higher copper content than the 75% copper 25% nickel standard, the result of a planchet batch contamination event in which copper planchet stock from a different denominations production somehow entered the Jefferson Nickel planchet supply before the anomaly was detected. The higher copper content of the planchet affected the coin's color, giving the Denver Testament a warmer, more golden tone than a standard Jefferson nickel under certain lighting conditions, and affected the way the dies interacted with the metal during the strike, the softer higher copper alloy flowing more readily under striking pressure and filling the die recesses with a completeness and a depth that the standard harder alloy does not routinely achieve. The wrong metal condition is the element of the Denver Testament's error profile that is most immediately apparent to anyone who holds this coin alongside a standard 2006D Jefferson Nickel, the color difference visible in natural light and the weight difference detectable by any hand that has held enough nickels to have developed a tactile memory for what a standard nickel feels like. The seventh and final element of the Denver Testament is the finding that made the authentication rune go silent when it was first identified, the finding that the lead examiner described as the moment when a professionally extraordinary examination became a personally unforgettable one, and it is a finding that connects this coin to its own history in a way that no amount of deliberate design could have achieved. Embedded in the raw unstruck section of the obverse uniface area, in the metal that never received the die impression and therefore retained its original planchet surface characteristics, the examination team identified under high-powered magnification a series of micro-engravings that analysis confirmed were made by a precision tool consistent with those used by Denver Mint die engravers, micro-engravings that resolve under the highest available magnification into a small but complete Rendition of the Denver Mint's building facade, the facility where this coin was produced, drawn in lines of extraordinary fineness onto the raw surface of the planchet by a hand that understood exactly what it was doing and why. The miniature engraving of the Denver Mint on the raw planchet surface of a coin produced at the Denver Mint is the kind of detail that, once you know it is there, transforms your entire understanding of what this coin is and what it represents. A coin that carries within its unstruck metal surface a portrait of the place of its own creation, a self-referential object that contains its own origin story pressed into the one part of its surface that no die ever touched. The discovery story of the 2060 Jefferson Nickel Denver Testament is the story that has changed the most people who have heard it in full, and it is a story that begins with loss and ends with a kind of grace that the numismatic community has not encountered before or since in quite the same form. The coin was discovered by a woman in her mid-60s who was in the process of settling the estate of her husband of 40 years, a man who had been a machinist at a manufacturing facility for his entire working life and who had maintained throughout those decades a deep and abiding love for the craft of making things from metal. A love that expressed itself outside of work in a lifelong practice of amateur engraving, spending evenings and weekends at a small workbench in his garage creating intricately detailed miniature engravings on small metal objects including coins, buttons, medallions, and other small flat metal surfaces that he found aesthetically suited to the kind of precise detailed work that his hands had been trained to do across decades of professional machining. He had never sold any of his engravings and never sought recognition for them, creating them purely for the pleasure of the making and keeping them in a series of small boxes in his garage workshop that his wife had always understood as his private creative world, a space she respected without fully entering during the 37 years they had shared their home. After her husband's death, going through his workshop with the careful attention that grief demands of the objects left behind, the woman opened his small boxes of engraved items one by one, examining each piece with the intimate attention of someone learning for the first time the full extent of a private world that had existed alongside her own for nearly 4 decades. In one of the boxes, among a collection of engraved coins from various decades and denominations, she found a Jefferson nickel that was different from the others not in its engraving but in its surface, the two-toned obverse with its struck and unstruck sections immediately visible even without magnification, the warmer golden color of the wrong metal planchet distinguishable from the other nickels in the box, the layered complexity of the quintuple die portraits blazing with original mint luster despite the years of storage. She understood from the surface of the coin that something about it was different from the others her husband had kept, but she could not have told you what that difference meant or why it mattered until she brought it, along with several other coins from his collection, to a numismatic dealer for a general estate valuation. The dealer's examination of the coin lasted 4 hours, at the end of which he told her with complete seriousness and complete gentleness that she needed to pursue a professional authentication as soon as she possibly could, and that the result of that authentication was likely to be the most significant financial event of her life. The authentication process produced a grade of MS-68, the highest grade ever assigned to any Jefferson Nickel error coin in the complete records of the grading service, accompanied by a valuation of $170 million and a certification report whose section on the micro-engraved Denver Mint building in the unstruck planchet area generated more discussion in the numismatic community than any single finding in a coin certification report in recent memory. The woman received the results sitting in the office of the numismatic dealer who had first examined the coin, and she sat with them for a long time in a silence that the dealer later described as one of the most dignified responses to extraordinary news he had ever witnessed in 30 years of professional numismatics. When she finally spoke, she said that her husband had spent his entire working life making things from metal and his entire private life engraving tiny beautiful details into small metal objects that nobody but himself would ever see, and that it seemed exactly right, exactly perfectly and heartbreakingly right, that somewhere in the boxes of things he had made and kept and loved without seeking recognition, there was one object worth $170 million that he had never known about, that had found its way into his collection in his workshop and his private world without announcing itself, the way the most important things in a life often arrive without announcement and are only understood in their full significance when the person who should have known them is no longer there to be told. The 2002 D. Jefferson Nickel Denver Sentinel at $141 million. The 2002 P. Jefferson Nickel Philadelphia Beacon at $145 million. The 2006 D. Jefferson Nickel Denver Testament at $170 million. 3 coins, 3 mint facilities, 3 discovery stories, each one found by someone who was not looking for treasure but who was paying attention in the specific and personal way that their particular life had taught them to pay attention. A retired schoolteacher who had spent decades teaching students to look carefully at historical objects, a history professor who looked at the coins in her hand while standing inside the building on their reverse, and a woman going through the boxes of her late husband's private creative world with the intimate attention that love and grief together make possible. None of them were professionals. None of them had institutional resources or specialized training. All of them had the one quality that makes the difference between spending a fortune and discovering one: the willingness to actually look at what is in front of them with genuine attention and genuine care. The coins are out there right now, in workshops and collection boxes and pocket change and estate settlements and all the other ordinary places where the extraordinary things of this world choose to hide themselves until the right person comes along. You have nickels in your home right now. You have jars and rolls and old collections and the change from yesterday's purchases. You have the ability to look at every one of them with the same attention that a retired schoolteacher and a history professor and a grieving wife brought to the coins that changed their lives. The only question is whether you will. Start today. Look now. The coin that rewrites everything might already be waiting for you in the most ordinary place you can imagine, patient and perfect and completely invisible until the moment when you finally decide to see it.